first thing, we are going to mix up our ice cream mix, and then in a little while, we'll all have some Pawpaw ice cream. This recipe is really simple. So first, we're going to take our Pawpaw puree, and you can use 1.5 to 2 cups of pureed Pawpaw.
And we get our Pawpaw puree from the KSU kitchen, I guess you'd say?
Yeah, we process and freeze quite a bit of Pawpaw every year that we use in ice cream that we serve at various events. But there are farmers that sell Pawpaw fruit at local farmers markets. I don't know about Owensboro in this area. I know in Bowling Green there's somebody that sells at the community farmers market in Lexington, Frankfort,
Yes.
Louisville, areas like that. So in September, when the fruit are in season, then you can purchase Pawpaws from local growers and freeze it. That's how we process it and freeze it to have the puree year-round to be able to use in different recipes.
And we've used that puree for bread, muffins, cookies. Just recently, I used it for a smoothie recipe. It was really good. I believe that is in your member guide. So to our puree, we're going to add 4 cups of milk, 4 cups of heavy cream. Maybe our heavy cream's really thick.
Did you say 4 cups of milk and 4 cups of heavy cream?
Correct.
We have our ice cream maker in the kitchen there, cause it's gonna be a little noisy once we get it turned on, so we can push that door too if it gets too loud.
And then 3 cups of sugar, and this is for a 4-quart maker. So depending on your ice cream freezer, you might have to cut that recipe in half if you have a smaller size. And then once we get this all blended together, we'll put it in our freezer, and ours only has to run for about 30 minutes before we have some nice soft ice cream.
Megan made ahead some pawpaw jam. Is it jam?
Yes.
Yes. Jam. So you'll get to sample this also today, so you can see that. Are all the recipes in the packet?
Yes, the recipe for the ice cream and the jam should be in your member guide, along with a couple of others that we've tried. And we'll turn it over to Ms. Sheri to get out of your
That's gonna go
Sheri
back
tell
in
you
the back to
more.
freeze. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about just kind of all about Pawpaws in general, you know, what they are, how to grow them, various things like that, while the ice cream is freezing. So then when I'm done, then the ice cream will be ready and we'll get to have some samples. So how many of you all are familiar with Pawpaws? You've tasted them or seen them around? Looks like a few, yeah, maybe 3 or 4 of you. So we're just gonna kind of go over what is a pawpaw, how to grow them, different things you can do with them. So the scientific name for pawpaw is Asimina triloba. Pawpaws are in the custard apple family, which the rest of this family are all tropical and subtropical fruits. You might have heard of custard apple, cherimoya, soursop. These are some tropical fruits that are relatives of pawpaw. Sometimes you see custard apples even sold in Kroger and Walmart and places like that. Those are the only ones that you would see, you know, in grocery stores around here. But it's interesting because the rest of this family are all tropical and subtropical fruits. Pawpaw is the only member of this plant family that will grow places where it gets cold. So here in Kentucky and farther north. And so pawpaw kind of retains some of that tropical flavor. So I think only a few of you said that you had tasted pawpaws before or were familiar with them. They have kind of a tropical, tutti frutti, like banana mango flavor. So it's this tropical tasting, kind of tropical appearing plant that can grow here in Kentucky where it gets below freezing in the winter. So it's a fairly small tree, slow growing, small to medium sized tree, gets about 25 feet tall maximum. Has kind of a pyramidal growth habit. And so the fruit are in clusters. You see this cluster has 3 fruit. Usually you see 2 to 5 fruit per cluster, sometimes single fruit. The fruit on average, about 1/2 pound is an average fruit size, but you'll see a range. You'll see some small fruit that are just 1/4 pound or smaller, and sometimes you see massive fruit that are about 1 pound. But for improved varieties, about 1/2 pound average fruit size. So this is what they look like inside. The skin is green, and even when they're ripe, the skin generally is green. Sometimes they'll turn slightly yellowish or get some little brown mottling on them, but in general, the skin is still green even when they're ripe. But when you cut them open, the flesh has kind of a yellow-orange color. And there's a range with different varieties. Some of them are more light yellow inside. Some of them are very dark orange inside. That's this kind of yellow-orange color range. And like I mentioned, the flavor is this tropical blend of banana, mango. Sometimes you'll see undertones of pineapple, coconuts. Some of them have kind of like a caramel or vanilla flavor to them, melon flavors. So kind of an interesting blend of flavors. And the texture of it is soft and creamy. And that's part of the reason it's really good in ice cream and smoothies and things like that, because the fruit itself already has kind of a soft, creamy texture. And it's similar to a ripe avocado texture-wise. So very soft. You can cut them open even when they're ripe and eat them with a spoon. Very nutritious, high in a lot of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. Pawpaw is also a nice tree to use in edible landscaping, which basically just means a tree that has both ornamental interest and produces edible fruit. So you see it has a really pretty golden yellow fall color in the autumn. The flowers are nice. They're these kind of maroon colored bell-shaped flowers, and they flower before and right at the time leaves are appearing. So the flowers stand out a little bit more because they're not fully leafed out when they flower. And one interesting thing about pawpaws, it's the exclusive host of the zebra swallowtail butterfly, which is that black and white butterfly you see on the lower right. So pawpaw is the only plant that zebra swallowtail butterfly lay their eggs on and the larvae feed on. So a lot of people that have butterfly gardens, they will plant pawpaw trees in order to attract this butterfly. And also, if you see that particular butterfly around, you know there are pawpaws somewhere nearby. So I mentioned pawpaw is a native plant in this area. This shows the native range. So on the left, you see the map of the native range where pawpaw is found in the wild. So if you go out in the woods, if you like to go, hiking or camping or anything like that, you can find pawpaw trees growing wild in the woods here. So the green area on that map is where pawpaws are found in the wild. So from kind of the mid-south down to mid or southern Mississippi, Alabama, a little bit into northern Florida, and up north into southern Michigan, even a little bit into southern Ontario, Canada, and then a little bit west of the Mississippi River is where pawpaw is found in the wild. However, it can be grown pretty much anywhere that has like a temperate growing climate. So USDA growing zones 5 to 9. So the map on the right, the purple area is kind of where they're native, but the green is where they can be grown. So basically anywhere it doesn't get terribly hot or too cold, because it does need some winter chilling hours, so it has to go dormant in the wintertime and has to get cold in order to do that. So it needs a certain number of cold hours in the winter to go dormant and satisfy its whole dormancy requirement. So in southern Florida, southern Texas, Hawaii, Mexico, somewhere like that, you don't get enough cold hours in the wintertime for pawpaws. And they're pretty cold hardy. They're cold hardy to about 25 below Fahrenheit. So around here, even when we've gotten at our coldest, which I think is about 20 below, we saw no damage to the pawpaw trees. But so North Dakota, Minnesota, places like that, it gets too cold for pawpaws. So being a native plant, I mentioned you can find pawpaws growing out in the wild if you walk around the woods. They are usually found in the understory, so in shady areas of hardwood forests. And they often grow along rivers and creeks and streams and areas like that, kind of on the banks of creeks and streams. So they'll form these big patches. You might have heard kind of a folk song, Way Down Yonder in the Pawpaw Patch. So pawpaw patch is formed. A tree will send up, could be hundreds of shoots from the root system. So the roots kind of spread out and send up all these little small trees, root suckers is what they're called, and form these huge patches, which you see here. And it may look like hundreds of trees, but they're all from one root system. So a lot of times these wild patches, people like to go out and forage for wild pawpaws too. So often you don't find a lot of fruit in the wild patches though. And that's for a few reasons. So again, they're found in the shade and the wild. So a lot of people think they require shade to grow, but they actually don't produce a lot of fruit in the shade. They produce more fruit in full sun. And also they need to cross-pollinate to set fruit. So if these patches are all from one root system, then there's not anything genetically different to cross-pollinate with their own. So you can get better fruit production in these wild patches if you clear them out, let a little bit more light in, clear out where they're overcrowded, and bring in something different, some other seedlings to cross-pollinate with. So if you want to plant pawpaw trees, first you want to select a good site. You want to select a place that's not in the most low-lying areas. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold and I'm like having trouble catching my breath. So the most low-lying areas, cold air is denser, heavier, tends to settle in these low-lying areas, and you'll see more frost and freeze damage in areas like that. Also, you want to have a good, deep, fertile, well-drained soil, high in organic matter, slightly acid to neutral pH. Plant spacing is about 8 to 10 feet between trees. I did forget to mention, yeah, so you want to plant them in full sun also. So as far as maintaining trees, once you have them planted, you don't have to do a lot of pruning. You prune trees in early spring, and you can prune them similar to an apple tree to kind of a central leader system, or leave them mostly unpruned. So irrigation, pawpaws do like a fair amount of water, so about an inch of rain per week. Fertilization, basically any kind of nitrogen-based fertilizer is good. Peters, Miracle-Gro, those that you mix up with water are good, but you want to stop that by August 1st so they're not growing too much into the fall. There are not a lot of pests and diseases that we see with pawpaws. Excuse me. Being a native plant, you usually don't see as many disease and insect problems as you do with like peach and apple, trees like that. One thing we do see, so see the cracking on that side of the trunk, that's southwest injury or sun scald. So in the wintertime, the sun shines strongest on the southwest side of the tree and causes temperature fluctuations, which causes the trunk to crack. So what we do about that, we paint the trunks with white latex paint mixed with water, just diluted 50-50 with water, or 2/3 paint, 1/3 water. So the white color reflects the sunlight and keeps you from having those temperature fluctuations on the trunk. We do occasionally see this fungal spot. It's just a black spot that you see on the fruit and on the leaves. This is worse in years when it's wet, and you can spray with fungicides that treat other fruit trees. But really, disease-resistant varieties are better, so sunflower is a little bit resistant to that. There are not a lot of insect pests that you see with pawpaw. You'll occasionally see this pawpaw peduncle borer that bores into the fruit, and you'll see this brown powdery stuff coming out of the fruit that tells you there's a caterpillar inside, a larva inside. That you don't see very often. We see it in about 3 to 5% of the fruit. So that's not a level that you worry about spraying the whole orchard when it's only in a few fruit. Occasionally you do see, it's kind of like a fall webworm that forms netting, webs on the end of the leaves and chews on the leaves and the twigs. These are not big problems, so you don't have to spray pawpaw trees with pesticides, basically is what I'm getting at. They're easy to grow organically or kind of more natural growing. One thing that is a bigger problem is animals like to eat pawpaw fruit. So especially raccoons, possums, things like that. I'll mention in a minute, pawpaw fruit drop on the ground when they're ripe, and so that's a lot easier for the animals to get to. So they come in, they like to take bites out of the fruit. It's hard to keep them out, so the best way is just to go in, pick the fruit before the animals can get to it. However, deer don't really like pawpaw trees or fruit that much, at least not compared to raccoons and possums. So if you want to start your own pawpaw trees, you can save seed. So if you get a fruit this fall, you wanna save the seed and plant a tree. There's kind of a process for doing that. Basically, it kind of replicates what would happen in the wintertime. So you wanna take the seed out of the fruit and clean it, put it in something to keep it damp, to keep it from drying out, and put it in the refrigerator for at least 100 days. So they won't germinate until they get at least that 100 days of cold stratification in the winter. They also can't dry out, so if you leave the seed sitting out at room temperature, like open to air, you'll get very low germination just even after a few days of leaving them out, exposed to the air. Also, you don't want to store them in the freezer. A lot of other seeds you store in the freezer, but pawpaws, it will kill the little embryo inside if you store it in the freezer. So you can plant seeds directly in the ground outside, or you can start them in pots. Pawpaws have a taproot, so if you use a pot, you want to use a pretty deep pot instead of, you see shallow pots that you get a lot of annuals and perennials in. So pawpaws need a very deep pot. One thing about starting them from seed though, they're not what's called true to type from seed. So if you eat a fruit, it's like, oh, this is really, really good. I wanna have a tree exactly like this. The seedling is not gonna be identical to the parent it came from. So the seedlings are a cross of the tree you got the fruit from and whatever pollinated it, essentially. So you don't know exactly what you're gonna get with seedlings. It's a mix of the two parents. If they're from good quality trees, have good parentage, then you're likely to get good fruit from the seedling. If they're from wild trees that are not as good quality, you're likely to have poor quality fruit. The seedlings take 7 to 8 years. So from the time you plant a seed until the time the tree is big enough to produce fruit is 7 or 8 years. So it does take a while to get fruit starting them from seed. So grafting is how we generally propagate pawpaw trees. So just kind of grafting in general, you take a cutting off of the tree that you want to propagate. Pawpaws won't root from cuttings though. So a lot of plants you can take a cutting and just stick it in water or dip it in rooting powder and dip it in, and put it in soil, and that will produce roots. But pawpaw unfortunately is not that easy. So you have to take a cutting off the tree that you want to propagate and then get a pawpaw seedling, just any random seedling, but it does have to be a pawpaw tree. You can't graft pawpaw onto apple or peach, something like that. So you take your cutting, you take your pawpaw seedling, you make a little cut on each of those. So this little kind of Z-shaped cut or a V-shaped cut. And you fit those together, wrap it up, and then that cutting that you took, that will heal together with the seedling and grow up and be your new tree, essentially. So there's a few advantages to this. The most important thing is you're propagating it true to type. So you've got a particular variety that you want to propagate. This is gonna be identical to that mother tree that you took the cutting from, as opposed to seeds that are gonna be a cross of the two parents. The other thing is that grafted trees take a lot shorter time to produce fruit, 3 to 4 years to produce fruit as opposed to 7 to 8 years for seedlings. So I wanted to go through some varieties of pawpaws that grow well in Kentucky. So if you're looking to buy trees to have in your yard, what varieties do we know do well here? And at Kentucky State University, we do breeding. So we have a pawpaw breeding program. And a lot of people don't realize that there are named varieties of pawpaw. So just like there's Honeycrisp apples and Gala apples, there are named cultivars of pawpaw also that have improved fruit quality and have different flavors. So some of them that we have bred and released at KSU, and so we know those do very well in this area. KSU Atwood, which has kind of a mango flavor to it. KSU Benson. So KSU Benson is the earliest ripening, so Benson will get ripe in about late August. It has these very round shaped fruit, so almost like a baseball or softball shaped fruit. Atwood is a little bit later ripening, I didn't mention, so Atwood is more mid-September ripening. KSU Chappelle is the other variety that we have bred and released from KSU. It's kind of mid-season, so usually the first week or two of September is when this gets ripe. It has kind of a creamy banana pineapple flavor, very vigorous, so the tree is healthy, fast growing, low percent seed, So basically, anything that comes out of KSU's breeding program will have KSU before the name, so you'll know that's something that was, raised in Kentucky and is gonna do well for you here. So a few other varieties that are not from KSU, but we've had variety trials and we know do well here. NC1, which also has a pretty dark orange colored flesh, large fruit. Overlease is interesting. It's very round, but it also has kind of a cantaloupe flavor. So if you like cantaloupe, you would probably like Overlease. Sunflower has a more mild flavor. And sometimes we kind of jokingly say, if you haven't eaten pawpaws a lot, usually you like the more mild flavored fruit. So we kind of jokingly call them beginners pawpaws, the ones that have kind of a mild flavor to them. People that have eaten a lot of pawpaws tend to like the more kind of intense flavors. These are some that come from a pawpaw breeder in West Virginia, Peterson Pawpaws. Potomac, you can kind of tell from the picture, it's a little bit harder to tell in photos, but really large fruit. So that was the largest fruit in our variety trials. Shenandoah is another that has a pretty mild, more banana-like flavor. Wabash has very round fruit that's really dark orange colored flesh. Susquehanna is one I definitely recommend. It's won a lot of taste tests that we've had. So Susquehanna is probably one of the best tasting fruit. And I wanted to mention, I think you have this in your handout too, so it's kind of hard to see and write down. So there are quite a few nurseries in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, kind of this area that sell pawpaw trees. A lot of people ask, where can I buy the trees? So there are a few nurseries. Also the Kentucky Division of Forestry, so the State Division of Forestry has like a native seedling program. And they sell pawpaw seedlings at a lower cost than buying them from a nursery. So pawpaws flower in kind of late spring, so April and May in Kentucky, usually right after redbuds and dogwoods. A lot of people ask, do you need separate male and female trees? Pawpaws don't have separate male-female trees. They have what's called perfect flowers. They've got male and female, the pollen and the stigma, all in the same flower, the same tree. But they do need to cross-pollinate. So you do need two trees, but they're not separate male and female trees. You just need two trees of different varieties or any two seedlings. Sometimes though you will see a single tree will set a few fruit. People will say, I only have one pawpaw tree. I know there's not another one for miles around. How did that happen? But they will set a few fruit through self-pollination, but it's not very many. Another unique thing about pawpaws, they're pollinated by flies and beetles instead of by bees. So a lot more plants are bee pollinated or wind pollinated, but pawpaws you'll see like lady beetles, different species of beetles, and flies visiting the flowers. They do flower over a long period of time, so you may be familiar with apple trees and peach trees. They'll come into full bloom and they'll be in full bloom for just a week or so, and then they're done. Pawpaws will flower over close to a month-long period, a 3 to 4 week period. So then harvest, which we're getting close to harvest season right now, late August through late September is season for pawpaw fruit to get ripe in Kentucky. A little bit earlier, farther south, later, farther north. So like I mentioned earlier, the skin color is not necessarily an indicator of it being ripe. So they're still gonna be green even when they're ripe, which makes them a little bit more difficult to harvest because you really just tell by touch. So you have to go feel the fruit. They're kind of similar to a peach, how a ripe peach is soft when they're ready to pick. They do bruise easily, so you don't want to stack them too deep in like a bushel basket. Have only a single layer or double layer of fruit in your basket or box that you pick in. So they do, because they're soft when they're ripe, they have a pretty short shelf life. So when they're fully ripe, just 2 to 3 days, they will last at room temperature. You can pick them when they're just starting to get a little bit soft, and they will fully ripen off the tree. If you pick them completely unripe, like rock hard, they will not ripen off the tree. So you can keep them in the refrigerator at that point for 2 to 3 weeks, and then they'll kind of slowly ripen in the refrigerator or bring them out to ripen at room temperature. But freezing, which we mentioned with Megan, processing them and freezing them is the best way to store them long term. So if you just got a few fruit that you're going to process, We would often use either like a mesh colander or a mesh bag. So you cut the fruit in half, scoop out the inside, put it either in a colander and kind of push it through with a spoon, or put it in a mesh bag and squeeze it through with your hands, and that separates the seeds from the flesh. Large fruit have a lot more fruit to them, so you want to choose larger fruit to process. And so then we put this puree in freezer bags that we store for 1 to 2 years in the freezer. It will last. And then you can thaw that and use it in ice cream, which we're gonna get to try today, smoothies, cakes, baked goods, jam, things like that. So this is a little kind of a step up for processing if you've got a few more fruit. This is a modified, that brand was Roma, but there's Squeezo and Victorinox. There's a few different brands. So it's basically one of these sauce makers that used to make salsa, other things. You do need to modify it a little bit with pawpaw. So the red spiral, if you use these to make grape jelly, you may be familiar with it. It's called a grape spiral, so it removes the grape seeds. Pawpaw seeds, you have probably noticed from the photos, are a lot bigger than grape seeds. So if you're gonna use this device like this, you need to cut off the last 2 spirals on the grape spiral to make it big enough for the pawpaw seeds to pass through. And we use the pumpkin squash screen that's the middle-sized screen for these. So you cut the fruit in half, scoop out the inside. There's not an easy way to remove the peel, unfortunately, other than just cutting and scooping. You feed that through the top, and there's a crank that you turn or a motor that feeds this through. You kind of push it down through the hopper, and the spiral will remove the seeds while the flesh gets pushed through that screen. And so you see the seeds come out one side, the fruit puree comes out the other side. We do run it through a few times. You see there's still quite a bit of pawpaw of the fruit flesh still adhering to the seeds. There's kind of a little sac around the seeds. So we'll take that through and run it through 2 or 3 times to get as much of it off as possible. And so then the same step, we put it in freezer bags and store it in the freezer. So this is some nutritional information for pawpaw, which should be in your handout also, so you can see the numbers a little bit better. But basically, pawpaw is pretty similar to banana as far as nutritional profile, which makes some sense. The flavor and texture is pretty similar, but as far as most calories, carbohydrates, it's pretty similar to banana. Banana does have more potassium. Of course, banana is kind of known for being high in potassium, but pawpaw is a little bit higher in calcium and fiber than banana. So it's also high in antioxidants, so it's got other kind of nutraceutical qualities to it. Where can you buy pawpaw fruit? We were talking about this a little bit earlier. With that short shelf life, usually it's local markets. You're not going to find them at Kroger and Walmart and places like that. They're not usually mass produced and shipped around the country like so much of our produce is. So generally farmers markets are where you're gonna find pawpaw fruit for sale when they're in season, which is gonna be, again, pretty much the month of